Does preparing for retirement keep you up at night? Well, let us help. In our free ebook, 5 Essential Steps to a Well-Funded Retirement, you'll learn how to save, how to potentially make up for lost time, how to fight inflation, how to create investment strategies to help protect against recessions, and more. Get our free ebook now at TRADEway.com/retirement. That's TRADEway.com/retirement. Hey guys, I'm David Mitchell, founder and CEO of TRADEway. What if God himself gave you a blueprint for how to handle your money? Well, the Bible is a practical book. Let's dive in and see what it has to say about wealth, about risk, about leverage, and about investing, and uncover how trading in the stock market can be a powerful tool for moving towards your biggest goals. We're so happy you're here. This is The Word on Investing. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Hey, last time the episode was from Ecclesiastes chapter 11, and we talked about mostly proper diversification and how God, who is the author of economics, obviously he's the author of everything that is, but he tells us how it works, how economics and finance should work right there in that scripture. So if you didn't catch that, go back and listen to it because that's where it all starts. And I'm going to sort of continue that study today. And we also mentioned last time that TRADEway has a division called AMPT, A-M-P-T, and that is our division that helps you invest your retirement funds, and it's based upon Scripture. So I'm going to kind of get into that a little bit more as we go here too. But Ecclesiastes 11:1 talks about proper diversification. And if you haven't heard it yet, I'll just tell you this. It says that you should give a portion to 7 and also 8, for thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. That's where God says that we should diversify into 7 or 8 major groups. All of our investments should be in at least 7 or 8 major groups, not one. We should never put all our eggs in one basket, right? And that's where that concept comes from, is Ecclesiastes 11, verse 2. And why should we diversify? Because we don't know what evil will come on the earth. And it goes on and gives a lot more detail of that we talked about last time. But we don't know the future. God does. He's predetermined the future. He says, so there's a good reason right there not to put all your eggs in one basket. What if you invested everything into a company that was in Iraq several years ago, and then all of a sudden George Bush attacks Iraq, and that company goes out of business, and you lost your entire investment? That, God gives reasons like that in that passage in Ecclesiastes 11. Well, we're going to go on to show you that AMPT, with TRADEway, we have actually created 8 major divisions. We have U.S. equities, in other words, stocks here in the U.S. stock market. We have non-U.S. equities. We have emerging market equities. We have real estate. We have natural resources. We have bonds. We have cash or near cash. And we have short-term trading. Those are 8 different baskets we can put the money in. Those are 8 different divisions. And that's kind of what God said to do. That's exactly what God said to do. Now, there can be some subdivisions. We'll talk about that later. But first, I'd like to kind of tell you why it is that, we base this on the Bible. First of all, I've asked classes all over the country. I'll stand up there and say, hey, can you guys tell me what the oldest book on the planet is that contains economic principles? And often they don't get it. And I'll have to tell them it's the Bible. And then so we're going to actually go to that book and show you some of the key financial and economic principles that all business is based on, but also stock trading. And then we go into that in the class. And a lot of people have asked me, why did you create AMPT for people's retirement funds? Well, at the breaks at our educational classes, people would bring me their financial reports and say, hey, take a look at this, and how do you think my fund manager's doing? And I'd look at that and I would see horrible things in there. I can remember one where their advisor had bought a stock for them for $200 a share. It was at 22 cents a share, and they were still in it. They never sold it. They held it all the way to the bottom of a crash in that particular stock, and that's just not necessary. And so we saw these things where their advisors had lost 30%, 40, even 50% of their total money in the whole world during maybe the 2000 tech bubble burst, or maybe in the 2008 Great Recession. We've just seen it again and again. And now we just had the 2022 Biden It's not a recession yet, but it was a bear market for a whole year. It's making a little up move now. If you're listening, we're at July 3rd, 2023. So it's kind of doing what I call a rally attempt, but I don't think this is over because the recession hasn't even hit yet. So we think a recession is coming probably by October of 2023, and it'll include all of 2024, and it may even go longer than people think. So you might want to think about that too. So like if you've got your money with an advisor that you know leaves your money in the market all the way to the bottom of these crashes, you might want to check out TRADEway.com and figure out how to find information on how to be involved with AMPT, AMPT. We do not leave your money in the market all the way to the bottom of major corrections and bear markets. We will go to cash. Sometimes we can even put money in inverse positions that have the potential to make money on the way down. So you might check that out. But people ask, okay, so then why did you use Scripture to actually put together the plan for AMPT? And I just want to say I'm not the first person to do this. So let me give you a little history. Back in 1636, Harvard University was founded. It was founded and named Harvard because its first benefactor was John Harvard, who was a pastor. The College of William and Mary was founded in 1693, and its first president was Reverend James Blair, a pastor who served for 50 years as president of that college. Yale was founded in 1701 by a conservative Puritan minister or group of ministers from Connecticut who had grown dissatisfied with a more liberal theology at Harvard. That's kind of funny, isn't it? Okay, and then Princeton University was founded by the New Light Presbyterians in 1747. Brown University was founded by Baptists in 1764. Rutgers University was founded by the Dutch Reformed Church in 1766. Jonathan Edwards, one of the greatest pastors and preachers in the Great Awakening, served as the president of Princeton University. His grandson, Timothy Dwight, served as president of Yale. These all established economics textbooks filled with principles of the Bible. Now think about it. These colleges were all preacher schools, but they didn't just teach theology. They taught medicine. They taught business. They taught certainly economics. And in those economics texts, the principles that went in there came from the Bible. Now, here's what's interesting about it. When I went to Baylor, it was 1972. I graduated from high school and immediately wanted to go to college. So I took summer classes at Baylor that summer. And then, went through undergraduate school and then got an MBA degree in graduate school. And when I took my first business courses, I can vividly remember that there were whole chapters on a thing called the Protestant ethic. And it gave John Calvin the credit for creating this Protestant ethic. And they said that the entire economy of the West was built on the Protestant ethic. Now, how many of you think you see that in textbooks today? I do not think they're going to footnote John Calvin. You know, people talk about Calvinism sometimes as if it's a negative thing. And I ask people, well, have you ever read Calvin? And they say no. And I said, maybe you should read Calvin. He's not a negative thing. He's a wonderful teacher of Scripture. But anyway, the point is they don't footnote Christianity or the Bible anymore. But those principles came from the Bible. So I am certainly not the first person to build a financial plan on Scripture. And I just thought that might be good for you to understand because you might think it's kind of odd, but it's really kind of cool, I think. So we've turned this into 8 major groups, and they come out of the Ecclesiastes 11 passage that we talked about last time, the fact that we should have 8 groups. And then we've got 16 subdivisions, and we find those in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 27. We'll take a look at that here in a minute. And what's fascinating, Ezekiel chapter 27 gives at least 16 subdivisions of investments that correlate to known industry groups in the world today. And Wall Street has created this cool product called an ETF, Exchange Traded Fund, that tracks these industry groups so that you can buy those like a stock or sell them. Buy and sell, just click a button, you're in, click a button, you're out, just like a stock. And it tracks all these industry groups and the same ones listed in the Bible 2,000, 400, 500, 600 years ago. That's pretty fascinating, isn't it? So God was telling us the things to invest in. It's still as applicable today as it was 2,600 years ago. So I want to talk about for a little bit this interesting idea. It says put it into 7 or 8 major groups. And let's talk about what the word 8 means in Bible numerology. I don't know if you ever looked at that before, but Hebrew, it doesn't have numbers, so it uses letters for the letters and for the numbers. And so it's very fascinating to look at what some of the numbers have come to typify in the Hebrew mind. My mentor was Dr. Erwin Freeman. He had 4 earned doctorates, 2 in theology, 2 in counseling, and he was a genius. But he wrote a book one time on science in the Bible, and it included numerology, and it's really fascinating. But the number 8 is the number for beginning again, new beginnings in the Bible and in the Hebrew mind. So in Ecclesiastes 11:2, where it says, give a portion to 7, also to 8, for thou knowest not what evil shall come upon the earth. I think that, or at least with AMPT, we use that 8th division for what we call short-term trading. And let me tell you why. If 8 is the number of beginning again anew, a lot of clients were coming to us through the years telling us, hey, my financial advisor just lost 30, 40% of my money, and I'm 70 years old and I don't have time to make that back. Well, true, if all you know how to do is buy and hold, like most of the companies want you to think you're supposed to do, you don't have time to make that back. But if you come out to TRADEway.com and you start learning the proper way to trade, shorter term trades where you take more risk, but you have the potential to make more return according to God's law of risk-return trade-off, and you learn how to manage that risk, then all of a sudden you have time to make back what they lost. And that's a beautiful thing. So we've divided this into 7 categories, but the 8th one is short-term trading. And we have the philosophy with AMPT, with your money, like if you just look at all your total money that you're going to invest for your retirement, we call it 80-20 money, but it doesn't really mean that because it's different for every person. But just as an educational tool, at least 80% of your money should be in the longer term, better diversified, safer types of investments. But 20% might be in shorter term trading that has a little higher risk so you can amp up your return. So that's kind of how we handle it. So we like to see a larger amount diversified and in safer, longer term, like a 3 to 5 year horizon on how you look at that investment. And then maybe 20%, or maybe for you it's 10% in short-term trades where the average trade lasts a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, like we teach in TRADEway. When you do that, you're doing something that most people out there, their advisors, number one, don't know how to do it, and number two, the company that they work for, they do know how to do it, but they don't want them doing it because they just want to buy and hold. So it gives you an advantage. And so we think, the 8th category, we're going to let that be the short-term trading. So the first 7 are going to be divided up among U.S. equities, non-U.S. equities like European stocks, for example, Japanese stocks, for example, Chinese stocks, for example, emerging market equities like Brazilian stocks or something like that, real estate, natural resources, bonds, and cash or near cash. And those can have some subdivisions, so we're going to talk about that now. Go into Ezekiel chapter 27. And we would start with verse 1 and go all the way through verse 33. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing to start out here. I'm just going to give you an example of how we've used this to find subdivisions under those 7 divisions we just spoke, especially under the U.S. equities component. We can have some subdivisions. And let me just give you an example, but I am going to go into the passage in a little bit and just go through and show you some more very amazing examples. Now, you have to use the 10 proper rules of Bible interpretation as you study the Bible. If you ever want to get a copy of that, email support@tradeway.com and ask for it. We'd be happy to send it to you. But you have to do that to interpret these passages. Now, in the last series, we talked about a couple of verses in the New Testament, one in Romans and one in 1 Corinthians, that tells us that the Old Testament writings were written as ensamples or types are examples for those of us who live now at the end of the church age. So we're supposed to be looking at the Old Testament, looking at the lives of these people, or looking at the writings as physical examples of spiritual truths, kind of like a parable almost, but it adds color and meaning to the New Testament doctrines and really a lot of business principles. That's how I find them. I will be reading in the Scripture and realize it's sort of teaching a spiritual truth, but the physical story behind it also has to be true, because God wouldn't use a lie to teach a truth. So the physical stuff works too. So that's where you find a lot of your business principles. So let's look just one example here. Ezekiel chapter 27, verse 7. It says, of the oaks of Bashan have they made thine oars. Fine linen thou spreadest forth to be thy sail. It's not a leap to realize that's talking about shipbuilding. It's talking about shipping and taking goods from one place to another. Can you think of any modern industry groups or stocks that could picture or be a type or an ensample of? Well, how about cargo ship businesses or trains or trucking or FedEx or UPS? You can even find an ETF called IYT, that's iShares Transportation Average. You can buy that like a stock. And if you want to track that, it is one of the industry groups listed in the Bible thousands of years ago that people invested in. So that's just kind of an example of how we put this together. And in doing it, we came up with 16 modern industry groups that are alluded to in this passage in Ezekiel 27. The first one, transportation, mining and petroleum, consulting, technology, automotive and farming. Of course, they didn't have automobiles, but they did have transportation, right? Building, commercial and home, department stores like Amazon, Walmart. Didn't exist then, did they? But they did have the idea of very similar to department stores. They called them fairs. They were almost like kind of like when we have a county fair and we have a bunch of modern products that people are showing off at those fairs. Okay, and then number 8, commodities trading. And number 9, manufacturing, merchandising, exporting. Number 10, metals fabrication. Number 11, medical, pharma, and biotech. I'll show you that in a minute. You say, how'd you find that in the Bible? Well, it's in there. And then military contractors, and then grocery businesses, and precious metals, and multinational conglomerates, believe it or not. Banking and financial industry, that's 16. So we have 16 subdivisions of the 8 major divisions there in AMPT. Let's go to Ezekiel 27 and start with about verse 3. And say unto Tyrus, O thou art situate at the entry of the sea, which art a merchant of the people of many isles. Thy borders are in the midst of the seas. Thy builders have perfected thy beauty. Now, I want you to think, we don't really think of the Bible sometimes as a practical book. We think of it like a theological book or a religious book or something. The Hebrews never thought of it that way. They think of it as a practical book. And I was a businessman with 2 degrees in business before I got saved in my car driving to work one day. And then a few years later, I got called to preach. And when I started studying theology, I saw business principles popped off of almost every page in the Bible. So it's everywhere. I mean, look at this. It's talking about builders. That's construction, right? And it's just all through the scripture. So we're talking about here Tyrus, a king, and whose city-state is situated at the entry of the sea. So now he's a merchant, right? A merchant of the people to many isles. So now we have shipping and we have retail where they buy products in one part of the world at wholesale. They ship it over to another part and mark it up and sell it at retail and make a profit. All of that's mentioned in verses 3 and 4. And then it says, they have made all thy shipboards of fir trees. So now we have the lumber industry. We've got ships being built out of the lumber, taken from fir trees from the area of Shinar, which is in the area of ancient Babylon or Iraq/Iran today. So then that part of the world. And they've taken cedars from Lebanon to make the masts of the sailboats or the ships. And so here we have shipbuilding listed, we have lumber industry listed, and then you got the oaks of Bashan, which are listed in verse 6, to make the oars that they used in the ships. So the different parts of these ships came from many parts of the world, of the ancient world. So you had shipping, you had all of these different aspects of building the ships. So shipbuilding is another, and freight, and all that would be pictured by this. And obviously there are modern industry groups that relate to all these things. Fine linen with broidered work from Egypt was that which thou spreadest forth to make the sails from. So that's another part of the ship. Blue and purple from the Isles of Alicia was that which covered thee. So they even made the sails pretty, by putting colorful things on them. So all of these things came from all over the world to build these ships. So first we can see an industry group just called transportation or shipbuilding, trucking, trains, UPS, FedEx, and etc. And then verse 12 says, Tarshish was thy merchant by reason of the multitude of all kinds of riches. With silver, iron, tin, lead, they traded in thine fairs. So the fairs, when you see the word fairs in the Old English, it's like a modern fair where goods were shown to people and they could come and buy these goods. It's kind of like a modern mall, but it's outside. And so it mentions that, but it's mainly talking about mining. So there we can talk about the mining industry and different stocks that would be companies that are in the mining industry today. And then verse 13 says, Javan and Tubal and Meshach, they were thy merchants. They traded the persons of men and vessels of brass in thy market. So you can just talk about all kinds of things in that particular passage. Merchandising can be just retail businesses. Human talent could be consulting organizations. And then it talks about brass. And brass, if you study brass, which I have, because it's kind of interesting, because in history it was the modern technology of the day. So modern technology, when you look at brass, it can, in the English, it can actually mean copper in the Hebrew, brass or copper, but it's something made of metal, obviously. But this was the age called the Bronze Age, and it was really the high tech of that part of human history. And so you have the Copper Age. If you go in there and you study all about it, it was quite amazing. Copper first came into use among the Chaldeans and the Sumerians. They established thriving cities built on this high-tech industry about 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. That's a long time ago. And these earthly peoples of the old eras, they had considerable skill in fabricating copper, and they used it for all sorts of things, from weapons to building materials and all kinds of things. And it sort of became the high tech of that day. I've got a lot of information on that we won't go into today because I'm more interested in minutia than you are probably. But when bronze came along, this was the first alloy made, and it found favor in all kinds of cutting implements, like shovels and picks and things like that, but also weapons. And there have been numerous finds in archaeology where they find copper and bronze for many purposes before 3000 BC. So it goes back a long way. And it really, I think, was actually one of the very first high-tech businesses were people that learned how to make money with products made from bronze. And so you can read all about that. It's really pretty fascinating. So obviously we can use that as a concept for many different modern industry groups. One could be weapons. So you could have your big companies that build everything from nuclear submarines to supersonic jet fighters and bombers, and like Boeing and, different companies like that where we could invest money into these kinds of stocks. They make weapons perhaps, or even all the way down to musical instruments. So you can see all these things are mentioned. Back then they had bronze spears and swords and daggers and all kinds of things that are mentioned in historical writings. So then verse 14 says, they of the house of Togarmah traded in thy fairs with horses and horsemen and mules. Well, that was the transportation of the day. So if you want to look for a modern corresponding industry group, it could be automotive industry. It could be jets, airplanes, things like that. Everything from cars and trucks and tractors and equipment. And verse 15 talks about the men of Dedan. They were merchants. Many isles were the merchandise of thine hand. They brought thee for a present horns of ivory and ebony. And then if you go and you study that, which I took time to study the history on all these things when I was developing the AMPT investment system. But when you look at that, when you look at the ivory and ebony, they were used in building to make buildings beautiful. So you've got the whole commercial and home building industries that are alluded to here with ivory in particular. And you can read domestic architecture and the history of this. There's a great book out there by Richard Brown, professor of architecture from London, England. It talked all about the ancient things that were built with these materials. So there, you know, it alludes to commercial and retail building, or I should say housing. And then verse 16 says, Syria was thy merchant by reason of the multitude of wares of thy making. They occupied in the fairs with emeralds and purple and broidered work and fine linen and coral and things like that. So now you can talk about the jewelry business, clothing and housewares. And, you know, this, you just keep reading it. Could be boring, I guess, because you're reading a lot of details on different specific things that are mentioned that correlate to modern industry groups. But I find it fascinating because I've always taught this in church, but also to students in TRADEway around the country, that the Bible doesn't only teach doctrine. I mean, doctrine is really important. It's important to be in a church that's strong doctrinally and correct doctrinally. But the other thing it teaches is what I call Bible methodology, and it's very, very important because where the Bible speaks to an issue of how to do something, we should do it God's way. It's God telling us how to do it. It's like the Bible becomes an owner's manual for human beings, and he's telling us how you do a particular thing. Like 1 and 2 Timothy and Titus are called pastoral epistles because it's God, through the Apostle Paul, teaching us how churches are built, teaching Timothy in particular how to be a pastor, what it means to be a pastor, what the qualifications of a pastor are. And so all of these methods are taught in the Bible as well. So in these passages that we're studying today, and we'll probably take one more episode on this, this is God's methods or God's methodology on how to do investing. And I think, you know, if we follow that, then when we follow God's methods, it's like, you know, we have potential of actually being successful because the author of the thing that we're doing tells us how to do it. Whereas if we just choose to do it our own way or a humanistic way, you have no guarantee at all of whether it'll work or not. Well, that's about all we have time for today. I'll pick up the rest of these next time. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll rate and review this if you did. And that way people with similar interests can find us. We can be a help to them too. And I hope you have a great day.